had a fantastic leader at Kraft Foods when I was there. He was so consistent in his messaging and how he treated people. And even when he wasn't in the room, it was like he's right here, right here. I could almost feel him and saying, this is how we do things. This is the right way.
Welcome to the Character Effect, where real leaders leave a mark that lasts. Together, we spotlight the quiet power of integrity, grit, humility, and respect. In other words, character, and the people bold enough to lead with it. And welcome to the next episode of the Character Effect podcast. My name is Dave Vasileros, and I'm your host today. And today's guest is a trailblazer in one of the most complex and critical industries in the world, supply chain. And I know that might not shout sexy, but there is nothing without supply chain. There's no food, there's no furniture, there's no nothing. Supply chain is at the heart of the things that we enjoy in our lives. My guest is Michelle Livingstone, and she spent 3 decades leading transportation operations at some of the biggest companies in America, including as Vice President of Transportation at the Home Depot. But that's not just what stands out about Michelle. It's the character that has fueled and shaped her career. She's been a champion for sustainability. She's an advocate for women in leadership, and someone who's built a reputation for integrity and heart at every step of her journey. I'm honored to sit down with Michelle today to talk about what it takes to really lead well and live well in a world that's constantly moving. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dave. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm really excited to dig in a little here and understand how you became the person that you are in your professional life and how it was shaped and affected by people who had high character, and maybe along the way, some folks who didn't have such high character. They may have also played a role. So, start us out how you got into this transportation world.
Yeah, I was so fortunate to get into transportation. My dad was in the trucking business for almost all of his life and certainly all of mine. And so he set me up well. I went to Indiana University as a business major, did the traditional accounting, finance, marketing, and then they did offer a very small program in transportation. And I said to myself, hey, this sounds like a good opportunity. I might know a little something about this. And I have had no regrets. So I really enjoyed being in the industry and have benefited from it greatly. So it's been very, very good to me.
Oh, that's amazing. And you said your dad wasn't. Was he a driver?
He was not. He
What did he
did
do?
primarily, he dispatched, he did claims, he did sales, he did operations, he did everything. And he did know how to drive, but that wasn't his primary job. But he had great appreciation for drivers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so he got to see the business side of driving and transportation. At what point did you, when you were doing your studies and when you were watching your dad and doing his business, did he come home and tell you about it? I mean, was this a topic of conversation around the dinner table?
Yes, and what I tell everyone, that everyone should come home and talk about their jobs to their kids. And even if they're rolling their eyes, I can assure you something is sinking in, because if you would have asked me much earlier in my life before I got to college if I was ever going to go into transportation, I would say, oh, absolutely not. But it is amazing, as I said, how much kind of sinks in and what you pick up along the way. And I think it's something that everyone should do. Go home, talk about your job, watch the rolling eyes, and just know that something is you're making an impact, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Something may stick. You just described, I think, parenting in general, right? You say and do all the things you're supposed to because you hope that despite the rolling eyes, they might hear something and somewhere down the road listen to it. I'll hold on to hope for that. In some of these conversations you had around the table, do you remember your dad talking about things that didn't go well or people that maybe he was struggling with?
Oh, absolutely. Transportation is a hard business, and it's hard to make everybody happy every day. And I certainly heard about challenging customers, and he kept me very honest. I will tell you that. Almost every weekend when we would chat, he would always ask me, Michelle, are you taking advantage of the carriers? Are you withholding payment from them? No, Dad, I wouldn't do that. That would mess up our financials. I don't want to do that. Well, then you must be charging them for claims that they didn't deserve. no, Dad, I wouldn't do that. So he kept me very honest throughout my entire career. And I think a lot of it comes from all of the experiences he had, and the not so good ones really stood out, and wanted to make sure that I was treating all of our business partners and drivers with respect and dignity.
It's interesting as you told me that story, I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's a set of values that your dad has imparted to you in the business setting. He's telling you, treat them right, be accountable, be honest. Was he as explicit as that when he talked, or were those just things that you knew were kind of the undercurrent of the way that he did business?
It was both, actually. There were many times it was very intentional. And I did grow up with a very strong sense of right and wrong, and have that Midwest work ethic and doing the right thing and doing what you know needs to be done, even when no one's looking or watching you, still make the best decisions you can. And I was very fortunate to have grown up in a household where that was standard operating procedure, both at home and in the real world. And that has stayed with me.
I don't know if your parents are still with us, but whatever the situation is, if I was your dad and I heard you say that about me and the way I raised you, I would feel really humbled and grateful.
No, they did a great job. I was very fortunate, and I miss them every day. Yes.
Tell me, early in your career, when you were jumping into this world, were you tested on those values? You were coming in maybe in the bottom and trying to work your way up.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I think everybody's character is tested on a daily basis. If you are undercharged at a retail store or at a restaurant, do you say something? I mean, I do. I don't want anything that I'm not supposed to have, and I don't want anyone to come up short. So if there's been a mistake, I'm going to say something. Not everybody feels that way, though. But I believe that your character gets tested every day, and how you choose to respond is important and tells a lot about who you are. So I think people are looking for integrity every day. Do you do what you say you're going to do? And I say, yes, that is one of the things I appreciate being known for. If I tell you I'm going to be there at 9 a.m., I'm going to be there at 9 a.m. and I'm going to be ready to work, and you can put me doing whatever you need me to do. I don't know if that's just part of my upbringing, or if that is, as I said, part of just the Midwest work ethic that everybody that you tend to see works very hard, or what to attribute that to. But it's really important to me. And when you go work for an employer, the value of their culture. At one point in my career, I probably would have said, "Oh, I can put up with anything. It's really all about the money." I mean, I was a poor college student. Sure, I could put up with anything. But then as you go on, you're like, no, it isn't just about the money. It really is. Does the cultural values of this company align with my own personal values? And that was one of the best things about working for Home Depot, is that they have very strong core values that matched my own personal values. It was one of the reasons why it was so much fun to work there. But other companies are a little more gray, and I have had the opportunity to work for them as well. And I understand, margins are tight. So how do you get by and stay true to yourself, but still do what the company needs you to do? And as long as you're within that very tight zone, then it's okay. But for me personally, if I'm outside the guardrails there, then I need to move on, because that doesn't work for me.
Early in your career, did you notice that you were standing out, not just because you were sharp and that you had a good background and that, you were doing a good job at what you were supposed to be doing, but you were standing out compared to your peers based on your integrity or on the level of accountability that you held yourself to? Was that an apparent thing?
Coming up through the career, I'm not sure that I did pick up on that. I think for the most part, folks try to do the right thing every day. So I'm not so sure that differentiated me. What differentiated me more was more of the positive attitude and the willingness to work with others, and more of those collaborative traits are probably what distinguished me more than the integrity. Because I think for the most part, if you ask the majority of the population, I think they would tell you that they have integrity. Whether their definition of integrity and my definition of integrity are the same could be up for debate. But I think for the most part, people think they're doing the right thing, or they can rationalize it.
Yeah. By the way, that's a really interesting feature of what we do at Canny, because we ask people, your colleagues and peers along the way, and managers and direct reports, we ask them, does Michelle act with integrity even when the pressure's on? And it's a very interesting thing to go through. I have my own Canny report, and it's an eye opener, because I thought of myself as a certain way. And I got some really good feedback. Let's just put it that way. And it's been really helpful for me to say, oh, wow, okay, I thought this, but this is the feedback I'm getting. How can I grow? How can I improve in this way? And you've hired probably hundreds, maybe thousands of people in your tenure. As you looked for traits of people to hire, what stuck out to you personally as someone who's going to lead a team?
Yeah, for sure. I have had the benefit of hiring a few folks along the way, and it's always a little dicey, to be honest with you. It's much easier to assess the technical skills. You can use all sorts of methods saying past performance is indicative of future performance, so tell me a time when. But when it comes down to the softer skills that are equally important, especially when you're trying to build a team, it gets harder. Softer skills like integrity and humility and confidence and grit and those kinds of things. I mean, those are hard to assess, to come up with the right questions in an interview process to really have someone tell me a time that you showed great integrity. Okay, well, I, I don't know. It's just
Exactly.
harder to come up with, and it's harder
Yep.
to evaluate.
Yeah.
So I think Candy's fulfilling a good void in the interview process.
Hiring, as you know, is tricky in general. And tricky is putting it lightly. Basically, most of us are terrible at it. And we think we're pretty good, but really we're not so good. And that kind of leads me to the Home Depot. You made the comment that they have really clearly defined values that they live by, right? That are real. I mean, most companies have a value statement. In my experience, the majority of employees don't know what that is. Some might know that they have one, and very few know what they are and then also are committed to them. And I think that's what I want to get to here. How does an organization as large and complicated as Home Depot have a clearly defined set of values that they are then able to really live? How does that work?
It works better than you might imagine. And part of it, again, goes back to the culture, and those core values are part of the culture. When you get onboarded, they talk about the core values and the inverted pyramid, where they're very much a servant leadership model. And I frankly didn't know what that was before coming to the Home Depot, but then I realized that that's the way that I wanted to lead. I wanted to be the servant leader, and I wanted to help my team be successful, and it wasn't about me. It's really all about the team and accomplishing these goals. And I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to describe that, but Home Depot gave that to me. In every conference room, almost, there's the core values, just as a reminder. There's actually conversations if we're trying to decide something, is what we're trying to do consistent with our core values? I hope, at least I tried to create an environment in my department, and I'm sure others do too, saying, if you feel we are violating the core values, every single person in the department has the opportunity to stand up and say, whoa, this doesn't feel like we're supporting the core values. Can we talk about this further? And so we challenge each other to make sure that we're supporting those core values. So it's a really important component. And by the way, Home Depot is a bit of an acquired taste, to be honest with you. It doesn't work for everyone. I mean, it's a fabulous company and wonderful people work there. But, there have also been a fair number of people saying, whoa, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm out of here. And that's okay too. Part of it is just making sure that you find people that are comfortable and share the same passion for these values that are part of the corporate value and then part of our own personal values.
You mentioned the term vocabulary. I didn't really have a vocabulary for that before I got to the Home Depot. That stuck out to me because one of the things that I've noticed in my career, and certainly as I'm working with Canny, is there isn't a great vocabulary around character in the processes by which we screen and interview and hire, and then how we develop employees afterwards. Now, you have exceptions there in companies like Home Depot, where it's clear, it's reinforced from the top. I'm sure that the leadership team at the Home Depot is held accountable to those values, because if they wouldn't be, then the culture would not sustain them at the bottom, right? You'd have all the associates at the stores and all the managers and all the folks down on the front line saying, yeah, we got values, wink, wink. But if they're enforced and lived at the top and spoken at the top, then you can build a culture around it. So this idea of there not really being a vocabulary, that really resonates. How do we get a vocabulary of integrity and respect and humility, servant leadership, things like that. How do we bring that vocabulary out into the mainstream? And I'm just asking a riff here. I'm not expecting you to be an expert on the topic, but in your experience, how do we bring that to a company or to a team that maybe hasn't had it in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am not an expert, so I'm sure others will be very willing to weigh in. But I would say part of it is making sure that you're walking the talk. Are you personally holding yourself to the character traits that you want others to display? So part of it is just making sure that you are serving as a role model in that. And I think there is also a need to reward and recognize your associates that are also following in that same model and reward and recognize the behavior that you want. It's a big deal when you show great respect for others and taking care of your associates and all of those things. When that happens, you have to reward and recognize it. And then over time, then it's like, oh, that's right. I guess that's the way I'm supposed to behave. Oh, I get it now. And they see that, and then hopefully they take it as their own, like, this feels really good. When I did it this way, this felt great. I want to do this again. And then when I did it that way, oh, that didn't feel so good. So I'm not going to do that anymore. So hopefully that's how it becomes an organic process that grows and multiplies over time.
Yeah. That idea of doing it yourself, then building in processes and structures that reward it and recognize it in others. I don't think you can build a culture without doing those things around or vocabulary around character. As you think back to your career, who stands out to you? I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm sorry. I'm sure you had many, but who stands out to you as a leader who walked the talk of these kind of core values of their character and said, this is important by my actions, not just my words?
Yes, I was very fortunate. I've worked for a lot of great leaders for sure. And I also worked for some that I never wanted to be like. And you learn as much from the folks that you didn't enjoy working for as the ones that you do. But I had a fantastic leader at Kraft Foods when I was there. And he was so consistent in his messaging and how he treated people. And even when he wasn't in the room, it was like he's right here, right here. I could almost feel him and saying, this is how we do things, this is the right way. Let's follow this path, and I could literally feel him with me, even which was such a weird thing, to be honest with you. but he was so impactful and so powerful and not a loud and boisterous person, but he was just so consistent in how he treated people and how he thought through things and how he approached things. And it's like, I knew what I was supposed to do each and every time. It was never a surprise. Even if something didn't go right, the way that he would provide some insight and help you, it's like, hey, the next time you might want to try and do this way, blah, blah, whatever it was. It was such a gentle force that I just learned so much from him and really appreciated the training I got from him. And I'm glad I got it, relatively early in my career because I was able to benefit from that for many years to come.
Do you mind sharing his name?
His name was Rich Moeller. Unfortunately, he's passed away several years ago, but the folks that I still stay in contact with, Kraft, that worked with him and knew him, feel the exact same way. So we really appreciate and value him and for what he did for us while each and every day and beyond. That's great.
Isn't it incredible? And in the NFL and in the NBA, but largely in the NFL, they have this concept of a coaching tree. Have you heard this?
I haven't.
A coaching tree is where you have a single head coach who brings in all these staff, right? All these assistants who play various roles in his coaching staff. And then the coaching tree is looking down 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, how many other NFL head coaches worked for that one head coach. And I've always really enjoyed that concept. Not every sport really tracks it that way, but this notion of I worked for Bill Belichick as a whatever assistant, and then 8 years later, I was a defensive coordinator with the Falcons, and then 5 years later, I was a head coach in Houston. It's meant to point back to that first coach, to say, here's a coach who did it in a way that he developed his people, he gave them opportunities to grow, he probably held them accountable, and probably he used his influence around the league to open some doors when they felt like they were ready to grow and do something outside. So this concept of a coaching tree is just kind of sit in my head. And as you mentioned, Muller, Richard, was it
Yes,
Richard
Richie
Muller? Okay.
Mueller.
When you mentioned him, I thought to myself, here's all these people you stay in touch with. You guys are his management tree, his leadership tree. And who knows where you've all ended up. But I imagine that each of you have had an effect on people that you have now mentored and led so that you could point back to that experience with Richie and be like, hey, he's the top of my leadership tree. Does that resonate with you? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does. It absolutely does. And he certainly was so influential for so many. We're so fortunate to have had his leadership and the benefit of that, of spending so many years with him. And it was great. It was really great.
That's awesome. Well, as you have mentored and managed and brought in folks that are earlier in their careers, they're looking to grow, how do you address these kinds of qualities and character traits with them? How is that worked into, hey, here's how you do this job, but also here's how you show up when you do this job? Is that something that you've built into your process?
Probably I have not built it in quite as precisely as you identified. And again, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it goes
Mm-hmm.
back to hopefully I'm setting a good example and they're seeing that. And I do feel like we're always being observed. Leaders are always being observed by their team and others who want to decide if they want to be on your team and all that. So I think we're always as leaders being evaluated each and every day. I started Women in Transportation at the Home Depot because I would go into the restroom and apparently men don't talk in the restroom, but women do. And I don't know about that for sure. That's just what I was told.
No, we
And,
don't.
I'd be asked questions about, hey, I'm traveling with a group of men. How do you handle yourself in this situation? And what should I do? And all those kinds of things. There's just so many things we take for granted that folks that know. And without those conversations and building that environment where it's okay to ask those questions like, how do I approach this? How do I do this? This happened. How would you have responded to it? And being there to provide a perspective, perhaps with many more years of experience under my belt, to be able to share those were always great opportunities to do more. So was I as prescriptive as what you defined? No, but I think it came about in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's always the actions, and you mentioned that earlier. It's always what you do that has the biggest effect. To set up something, it was women in transportation,
Yes.
right? Tell us a little bit more about that. Is it still going? Is that still out there?
Yeah, you know what? It moved from women in transportation to women in supply chain. So it really gained a popularity and it was just a great environment. And I started it when I was still at Home Depot. I'd been there and we celebrated our 10th anniversary. And it is still going on. And I was very honored. They invited me back 2 years ago to speak at their big symposium there. And that was really nice to be able to come back. So it was great that it withstood the test of time, particularly because supply chain tends to be still a more male dominated industry. Having a group of women who have kind of figured it out the hard way in some cases and can pass those lessons along is a real opportunity and treat to be able to do that. So it doesn't have to be so hard for everybody all the time. You don't
Yeah,
have to, you don't have to carry that 50-pound bag of glass with you everywhere you go. It's like you can fast adapt.
that's right.
And get
That's right.
done.
That's trailblazing, right? Is the people go before they do the hard stuff to make a trail for the folks who are following. As I've read about your career and learned more about you, that sounds like it fits the bill. As we wrap up, what advice would you have for young people who want to get into transportation? And what advice would you have for them related to the way they show up?
Yes, well, I do have a few nuggets along the way that I've picked up and always like to share because we are trying to recruit and retain the very best in the industry. And there's still an opportunity to recruit and retain more women in transportation and supply chain. So I feel very passionate about this. One of the recommendations is to make sure that you always have a seat at the table. Literally sit at the table. If it's a big conference room and there are chairs along the side and you're like, oh, I need to prepare for the next meeting, don't do that. If you need to be at the table and you were invited to the meeting for your opinions. And so if you have an opinion, you need to speak up. And that is probably one of the general overall themes that I've learned the hard way is there were times in my career I probably should have used my voice more And I didn't. I mean, it sometimes was the highest ranking female in a meeting or whatever. And I, thinking back, I don't have any big regrets, but one of the things I think I could have done better was to make sure that I'd use my voice, share my perspective, perhaps from a different light that the primarily men in the room may not have even thought about, so that this is an industry that women in particular want to come to. Because
Yeah.
the work is hard.
Yeah.
It's demanding 24/7. So we need to make it a great place where we embrace everyone so that they can be successful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. One thing that sticks out as you shared that piece of advice was the word confidence. That's one of our 6 core character traits, confidence. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to pull the curtain back a little on some of our data. The number one most consistently scored trait that scored below average out of the 6 traits, this is integrity, accountability, respect, humility, grit, and confidence. Confidence came in lowest across the board. People who were rated highly on integrity and respect and grit were often still rated lower on confidence. And I think that's something that you certainly brought up and I think is out there. People just aren't quite sure. How do I carry myself? Am I allowed to insert into this conversation? How do I grow my confidence? I love that you pulled that out there, because the truth is most people who are confident, it's not because they know everything, and it's not because they're the best at everything. So somewhere along the way, they figured it out, and that's open to the rest of us. It's been a gift to learn and be with you, Michelle. It's not just about logistics and leadership, but it's the kind of character, it's the who you are that sustains a career that's meaningful. You got to bring the values, you got to live them, you got to preach them, you got to reward them. You've shown what it's like to lead with the kind of purpose and accountability and respect that lifts other people. And I'll bet that there's some people along the way who think, oh, what would Michelle say? Right? That little tap on the shoulder, right? Right there, right there. And that is what I think is the character effect. You live a high character life and you lead with high character. You're the person that quietly taps the shoulders of others and inspires them to be great. So, Michelle, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and all the best to you in all the things you're doing.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a delight.
Thank you for tuning in to the Character Effect podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. But in the meantime, give us a follow on your favorite podcast platform.